Alright, welcome to our inaugural sort of unboxing episode, which in keeping with our time machine theme we will call Unfridging. Or in this case, mini unfridging, as thanks to global circumstances, I've had to curtail a lot of my vintage computer purchases, so there's not the usual half-ton of other people's stuff waiting to be unboxed here. By the way, these aren't donations, I don't solicit those. I just buy what I like here and there, and then let it accumulate in storage down in the States, which is where most of the stuff typically comes from, and then I ship it up here in combined shipments. I've been collecting computers and components for about 20 years, and because I'm up here in Canada with its much smaller market, I have to rely on eBay a lot to find things, especially in the USA. Unfortunately, a lot of American eBay sellers are reluctant to sell internationally due to scams, return problems, and so on. eBay's global shipping program was supposed to make that easier, but many sellers still avoid international folks like me. So to get around that, I have to use a US freight forwarder, which gives me a US post box and space to store stuff temporarily, and then I can use combined shipping to ship a bunch of things together, saving money and space. So sometimes I kind of forget what I've bought until I get around to sending it up. And it works well, they tend to pack things pretty good, although we have had the odd mishap, unfortunately including one where a very rare wood-clad Informer terminal got lost. Anyways, let's get to it here and we'll see what I've got. Okay, so first up are these manuals for the Apple Extended 80 column card. This card should be in the box there too. I think this first book is for the non-extended version, and then the second book is for the extended version. It's even sealed in plastic still. Nice. And here's the card. From what I've heard, the Apple version of the RGB card is pretty rare. There are some other versions that show up from time to time, but I have seen this one on eBay a few times in the last year, so I'm not sure about that. This card came with a little pigtail that gives you a 15-pin port to plug your RGB monitor into, which is great because these cards are often missing those when they're sold loose like this. It also came with the monitor cable, so that's one more thing I don't have to hunt for. The extended card added an RGB interface so that you could use an RGB monitor. The monitor intended to work with this card is the Applecolor 100, an RGB color monitor that seems to be pretty rare. I got lucky and scored one for $199. They normally go for $500 plus. I didn't ship the monitor with this group though, as I was too afraid of it getting lost or damaged. CRT monitors are really risky to ship. Most sellers are clueless about proper packaging, and they are easily damaged or destroyed, just like this monochrome Apple IIe monitor that I got recently that was totally destroyed, with the neck of the CRT having been slightly cracked. Another monitor I have, a Tandy CM2, arrived looking cosmetically fine, but inside the main PCB had been bounced and then torqued inside the case until it had nearly split in half. The CRT itself seems alright, so I'm hopeful I can fix the board and salvage that one. But yeah, at some point I'm just going to have to swallow hard and ship the Applecolor up here and just hope it gets here in one piece. Anyway, the Applecolor card basically eliminates the color bleed through you see with standard composite graphics on the IIe, and it also added 3 new video modes including 560 pixels by 192 pixels monochrome, 140 by 192 pixels with full 16 colors, and the ability to mix 560 by 192 pixels and 140 by 192 pixels anywhere on screen. The Applecolor 100 also works with the Apple III, which has these capabilities built in. I'll do a video to show all of that off very soon. Okay, next up is this little box here. Wait, what is this? Oh yes, this is a Signetics 2513 character generator. These were used in a variety of vintage machines, including the TV typewriter and the Apple II. I've actually purchased this one with a date code in late 1976 to use in an Apple I replica I plan to build one day. The 2513 generates a full uppercase alphabet with numbers and common symbols to work with, back in the days when typing everything in caps wasn't considered shouting. Ah, this is the Netpliance iOpener. Bit of a mouthful, huh? Ah, look at that, in its original box and everything. This was part of the whole internet appliance fad, which died as quickly as it started. Basically, a bunch of companies were trying to offer a super cheap, stripped down computer strictly for internet use. This was back in the days when computers were expensive as heck. Many people were interested in the internet, but it was still a curiosity at that point, and not many wanted to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on a computer they didn't really need otherwise. The iOpener basically was offered on a subscription plan, sort of like with your cell phone. Later, hackers figured out how to fully enable this as a legit computer, which Netpliance desperately tried to stop because without the subscription they'd end up losing a lot of money on these things. This one looks practically brand new, unused almost. Look at the plastic still on the keyboard cord. There's no yellowing, no scratches. Wow, there isn't even really any dust on this thing. In the original box, with original plastic and foam inserts. That probably gives you an idea of how useful these things really were once people got their hands on them. This one is missing its power cord, but a quick look online says it uses 19 volts at 1.5 amps, so pretty much any laptop power cord will do that if it has the right barrel plug. I got this machine because I'm doing a video on a bunch of internet appliances, and this was among the premier examples of that particular fad. Yep, wow, it still works. And man, is it slow. So, read any good books lately? Holy cow, this thing is slow. Nope, your screen isn't frozen, it's just taking this long. And did I mention this thing takes a long time to boot up? I might go and grab dinner while I wait on this. And we'll just cruise the keyboard for a few seconds here and have a look at all the special function keys. Oh look, it even has an emergency key. Finally getting there. I guess I'm being a bit impatient. You know, full-blown computers back in the day did actually take quite a while to get up and going. I'll get a lot more in depth with this, but here's a quick sampler. This little thumb doohickey thing here is the quote-unquote mouse, and then the quote-unquote mouse buttons are on the left here. Kind of a weird setup, but yeah, it is what it is. Wow, this thing still has ABC News cache from 2001. President Bush. Wow, that seems like a lifetime ago. It's probably the last time this thing was used. Okay, this next one is kind of exciting. Here's a magazine clip for it the seller happened to keep with it. I've been wanting one of these ever since I heard of it. This is the Multitech Microprofessor 2. If you don't recognize the name Multitech, you might recognize their current name. And if you don't recognize that, well, welcome to planet Earth. And sorry we're in a bit of an off-season situation here right now, but hopefully you have a pleasant stay anyway. Anyway, this thing was built as an Apple II compatible, which is, well, it's kind of an outright lie. This machine was aimed primarily at Asia, and its basic interpreter is something known as Chinese BASIC, which is basically a form of Apple II BASIC that has been localized for those who speak Chinese, and may have been localized from Apple. Basically, a lot of foreign manufacturers simply ripped off Apple's BASIC. To get Chinese characters, Multitech had a choice between using a really expensive hardware character generator or generating the text via software. Multitech, for cost reasons, chose software. So this machine doesn't have the Apple II's text mode, which makes a lot of Apple II software impossible to use. The second thing they did was they took one of the graphics buffers and put it at a memory location that is totally different from the Apple II. That made even more software incompatible. And then finally, they did away with some of the joystick circuitry and also changed the address of the keyboard input. So pretty much this thing can't use almost all Apple II software unmodified, except for the odd thing written in BASIC. Some Apple II clone, huh? Anyway, the mere mention of Apple II and the tie-in with Acer got me really interested. Usually when these machines come up, they're PAL versions rather than NTSC versions, and usually they don't have any extra peripherals, but this one did. Let's see here. Ah, this is the printer. This looks to be a thermal type printer. I don't see a way to install a ribbon. I'll have to invest in some thermal paper and try it out. Here's a power supply. This uses a somewhat strange 9-pin configuration, sort of like the joystick port on a Commodore 64. I've got a few other computers that use this configuration. I guess it's one of many ways to keep the different voltages separate. This appears to be the disk drive controller with a single drive port. I believe they made two versions of this card, one with a single drive and one with dual drives. The disk drive appears to be the one thing that is compatible with the Apple II, at least in terms of reading and writing disks. Allegedly, you can hook up a real Disk II drive for this thing and vice versa, and they'll work just fine. In fact, I have an original manual here, which is a rarity for me, as I usually collect machines where this stuff is long gone. The manual shows a procedure for quote-unquote converting the Apple DOS disk into the DOS the MPF2 uses, along with some other programs and utilities, but also maybe to avoid shipping software that might cause a copyright infringement lawsuit from Apple. Okay, here's the disk drive. This is one of the first MPF2 drives I've ever seen. It's got a little bit of rust, but not too bad otherwise. The front face kind of reminds me of the Commodore 1541. Anyway, like I said, it's supposed to be fully compatible with Apple's Disk II drive. We'll see soon enough. Okay, and here's the machine itself. One thing that is striking about this quote-unquote clone is how small and light it is. Naturally, on a machine this small, they've had to shrink the keyboard too. They've given us all the right keys, even marked the G key with the little bell function, but this thing is a fat finger disaster waiting to happen. I like the novelty of chiclet keyboards for about 2 seconds, and then once I start trying to actually use one, I'm like, nah. I mean, I'll give them credit, it's super light, but they've lost a lot of what makes an Apple II an Apple II, namely expandability. There's one expansion port on the side here, but that's it. And obviously it's not compatible with Apple II's slot system at all. On the back we have an array of ports. One thing I'll note is this machine has an RF modulator built in, unlike the Real 2. The disk and printer port I think are on the side. Internally we can see they've compressed things into a very tight space, much smaller than the original Apple II motherboard, although a lot of that is accomplished by dropping circuitry for components of the Apple II they didn't copy. I'm quite impressed by how cosmetically nice this machine is. Unfortunately it isn't working, apparently it was in storage for some time and just quit. But I think we can take care of that. I'm just looking at one of the screws here and it looks like there's basically some moisture ingress into the machine. I would bet dollars to donuts that some of the sockets probably have a bit of rust in them. I'll do a video on the machine itself and the repair at some point in the future. I'll also try to locate some original software for it in the meantime. Believe it or not, there was actually a clone of this clone called the Microdigital TK2000, a Brazilian clone that looks more like an Atari 1200 XL. There's a whole bunch of software for that machine, supposedly, games and so on that were ported from the Apple II that should work with the MPF2. We shall see. Alright, what do we have here? Ooh, this is the MicroMint Z8. This little thing is sort of like the Raspberry Pi of its day, a single board computer and a very small one at that. MicroMint was an interesting little company that made all kinds of stuff, usually miniaturized electronics gear for specific needs. The Z8, as the name implies, uses a Zilog Z8 chip with a tiny basic interpreter and 6 kilobytes of RAM built right in. It could be used with a backplane and other accessory boards MicroMint produced to function as a full-blown personal computer, or it could also be used for mission-specific tasks like controlling industrial equipment and such. I've only got the one board here, but I jumped on it for $45 as I don't think it's ever been used. We'll definitely do a video on this and check it out. Basically you just need power and to connect a CRT based terminal to the serial port on the back here and away you go. Pretty slick. Okay, what's this? Ah, yes. Okay, so you might be able to get an idea of what this is, possibly by the label. This is a brand new old stock 400 kilobyte floppy drive, and check it out, it's in its original shipping carton. This would have been shipped as a replacement part to an authorized Apple dealer or repair shop to replace a non-working unit. I'm guessing, given the 400K drive's relatively short lifespan, that this one simply never made it into a machine because the 800K drive made it totally obsolete. Wow, this thing is so archaic looking and huge compared to modern 1.44 meg floppy drives. And zero dust or grime. Wow, this thing is clean. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this has never been used. The reason I bought it is I scored 128K original Mac recently, and I'm planning to quote-unquote downgrade it back to 128K, as it was upgraded to 512K and an 800K floppy by its original owner. The 400K drives were known to have some issues, especially as they aged, so my hope in grabbing this one is that I could avoid some complicated diagnostic issues. Probably I'll just need to lubricate it a bit. I don't feel bad about using it, you know, that's what it was meant to do, and anyway, I don't anticipate using my 128K Mac much at all, so it'll just be cooling its heels inside that instead of in this box, which I will keep in order to preserve history. Nice! Okay, next up in its own box is the Micro Expander 1. This one I'm really excited about. It's got kind of a strange name with an even stranger story. Superficially, this looks like an Apple II clone also, but it isn't. In fact, this machine has nothing to do with Apple at all. According to Lee Felsenstein, its designer, Lee was approached by a Swedish business person who wanted him to develop a sort of clone of the Tandy TRS-80 Model 1, but with the addition of color graphics. Lee said he didn't charge enough for the project and ended up taking a job with Osborne to design the Osborne 1 portable computer. He passed the project off to his former processor technology partner Bob Marsh, who got the thing into extremely limited production, around 200 units or so, before it was discovered the Swedish fellow didn't actually have any money to pay for them. Anyway, according to Lee, all but a handful of the produced machines were scrapped. I would assume to recover the valuable ICs and other parts, making this a very, very rare machine. I ran into the Expander first on eBay. Someone there had one for sale for $175 and I passed on it because both they and I mistakenly thought it was an Apple II clone. Once I learned what it really was, I spent the next several years kicking myself. A few more have come up since then, and I've missed each one of them until this one came up. To me, the Expander is what the Sol 20 might have been had processor technologies survived long enough to create a follow-up machine. There's lots of classic 80s changes, plastic instead of wood and metal for much of the case, a common as nails stack pole keyboard, and of course color instead of the monochrome of the Sol, with S100 slots included for compatibility. I regret I've never seen one of these powered up. I would assume there's very little software out there that can specifically take advantage of some of its capabilities, like color. There's lots of Sol20 DNA visible, including the physical form factor, which is roughly the same size and shape as the Sol, the Z80A CPU, which is kind of the spiritual successor of the Intel 8080, the horizontal mounting of the S100 cards, and even the placement of the linear voltage regulators where the Sol20's internal power supply would have been. There's even some similarity in how the memory is set up. On the original Sol, you had just 2 kilobytes to run the whole system, which could be expanded with memory cards. With the expander, again you have 2 kilobytes on the motherboard, however all of that is for video. You have to have a 64 kilobyte memory card installed in one of the S100 slots to actually use the thing. Another feature, looking at the manual here, is that the machine can apparently do real graphics. The Sol could not. It operated only in a text mode, so games and such had to be created using the available text characters, resulting in some truly heroic text-based game efforts like the famous Targ. The only thing I really regret about this machine is the choice of making the power supply external. Anything that is externally attached is at a risk of being lost, and unfortunately that's the case with this one. Building a replacement is beyond my skill set, as there are multiple DC and AC voltages to contend with. The power supply is also pretty huge, and it's kinda ugly. I always kinda wonder about people that bought sort of one-off machines like this when they were still current. Machines that didn't quite fly for whatever reason were often provided without any support or warranty whatsoever. Anyway, I'm really glad to have this incredibly rare piece. Along with my Sol20 and my Osborne 1, I now have the trifecta of Lee Felsenstein designed computers. So that's it for this mini unboxing. I'll certainly film any future interesting unboxings I do. Right now, with so many aspects of ordinary life up in the air, it feels a bit frivolous to be spending anything on a hobby like vintage computing, so I've restrained myself to a large degree. But rest assured, you'll see all of this stuff again, and probably more stuff in greater depth in the future. Anyway, take care, keep safe, and as always, thanks so much for watching.